This episode of Where Did the Road Go is brought to you in part by our Patreons. If you want to become a patron, go to wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
And welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? I am here with my in-studio guest, Mr. Peter Robbins. Hello, Peter.
Good evening, Seriah.
And kind of a rush start here, but we got it. We're here. And this is a live show, which I don't do many of anymore. Pretty much only if I have someone in studio like yourself. The last one we did was with Adam Sane, which you were going to be here for, but our timing was really bad. So, but we are going to talk to you about a whole host of things tonight.
Indeed.
And it's been almost a year since you've been here, I think.
It's true. Well, it's a big commute for me.
That whole 10 minutes. Because I think the last time you were here, you were with Kate Thorndal? Kat Thorndal?
Yes. That would have been about a year ago. That's right.
Around May-ish, I think? April?
Yeah. Kate is, as some of your listeners know, one of the best-known UFO-related personalities in Norway. Mm-hmm. And she was here on her first visit to America, also gave her first talk in the States at the Pine Bush UFO Festival, which will be happening next month in Pine Bush, New York. And right now, she is working away to bring me and Kathleen Marden, Travis Walton, a host of interesting folks to Norway in August.
Nice.
Yeah, well, we won't know till June. She's being really smart about it, and unlike many conference promoters and organizers, it's not going to happen unless there's X number of advanced ticket sales by some point in June. Mm-hmm. But here's hoping. I haven't been to Norway in many years.
Well, I've never been to Norway, so there. All right, so let's, wow, there's so much stuff going on. Let's see what we can squeeze into the next hour and a half. First of all, you are on the cover of the Ithaca Times.
I am. I was a legend in my own mind for a week.
And this, this is kind of a big deal. This is not something that the Ithaca Times normally covers.
No. The Ithaca Times, for almost everybody in the world who does not know it, is our free weekly newspaper, actually a very good paper. And the way that they snagged me was about 2 months ago. They assigned a reporter, Matt Butler, good writer, to interview my dad, who made local news, to put it mildly, by beginning to write his memoir at the age of 97. Completed it last year. No, at 95. Completed it last year at 97. It's now available worldwide from Amazon Books. It's called An Ordinary Man, which my dad is not. And they interviewed him. And at a certain point, Matt went into my office, saw the 8,000 UFO books, and said, "What is up?" So he came over, did a very extensive interview. And I was pretty impressed with the way that it came out. Not in love with the photo, but that's pure vanity. And, you know, the usual editorial nonsense of having to give it a wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of title. In this case, it was
UFO spotting.
UFO spotting, and then the subtitle was Spacing Out. Get it? Heavy as lead. But he did a great job. And one of the upshots of it was, in this totally connected world, if you write an article on UFOs with the word UFO in the title, it goes out all over the place to certain people. And the next thing I knew, I got a call from George Knapp's assistant. George is a tough, no-nonsense investigative journalist based in Las Vegas who has tackled the UFO subject for decades and is also a host of probably the best-known paranormal radio show in history. Where Did the Road Go? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Coast
Not
to
quite.
Coast. And so Sunday last, I joined him on the air for 2 hours, and he springboarded off of the article, and
Yes.
it was nice to be back on Coast.
And, of course, the person who started Coast, the late Art Bell, just had passed away 2 days earlier.
Exactly. Yeah.
And on Friday the 13th, there's some cosmic thing there.
Yeah.
You know, for Art Bell to die on Friday the 13th is, okay. You know, if you're going to go out, why not?
Yeah, exactly. Won't forget that. And Art was a real pioneer in
Oh,
broadcasting.
absolutely.
He really was the man, not a person, but the person who pioneered late night paranormal radio show from his trailer in Pahrump, Nevada, I think, yeah, and built it into the most widely listened to paranormal radio show in broadcasting history.
Yeah, and as someone said, he's probably one of the only people in this field that's a household name to people who are not interested in this field.
Yes.
And that's impressive, you know.
And in the movie Independence Day, they basically...
Was it Independence Day or was it 2012? I think I know what you're thinking of. With Woody Harrelson?
Yes, you're
That was
right.
2012, yeah.
You're right, yes. Woody Harrelson basically played a character based on him. Things did not end well for most of the people on the earth in that film, but it was entertaining. And without Art, I think that character would have never been written.
That is very, very true. Yeah. So with the Ithaca Times article, what did they cover in there? Is this available online? Can people?
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, give the full title.
What do you mean? The full title off the cover says UFO spotting. What has this man seen?
Yeah, if you write Ithaca Times UFO spotting, it'll take you right to the article. Basically, he wanted to know, our reporter wanted to know how I got involved in the field. He is also really curious about what I do relative to what other people do. I mean, there's so many hot, sexy, breaking, alleged cases, very colorful personalities. I'm kind of a bit of a Luddite and a nuts and bolts person. I base most of my work in post-war history. I think it's really important that we understand how the phenomena came to be, the importance of the ridicule factor in putting it down, so to say, and how effective it was. We covered a lot of territory, and I hope all of your listeners will check the article out, and they can always reach me through you if they have any specific questions about it. One of the things that I introduced Matt to was some of the extraordinary, authentic, fully declassified, formerly secret documents going back to the 1940s, playing them against the condescending, superficial, nonsensical, dismissive major media coverage from the get-go. And what we see is sometimes day by day, the nonsense that was being fed to Americans and what was going on in the world of officialdom and how seriously they took the extraterrestrial hypothesis as America and then the Western world accepted that it was all nonsense and wired it up to be almost shorthand for mental delusion. Little green men, flying saucers, wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
How do you think that the Tom DeLonge thing affected people's view of this? Do you think that would have made any difference to it, like him doing this article?
I
would say the New York Times thing. Let's not say the Tom DeLonge thing. The New York Times article.
Yeah. What you're talking about there is a pair of articles that came out in mid-December in the world-famous New York Times that went against their historic policy. Starting in the summer of 1947, the Times led major media in a very aggressive campaign of condescension, dismissing the subject, pseudoscience, explaining it away with nonsensical explanations, and completely ignoring the obvious possibility that some of these phenomena might well represent highly advanced craft from parts unknown coming and going with impunity. I probably am the only person I will ever meet that has read every single article, letter to the editor, photo caption, editorial that the Times has ever published on the subject of UFOs.
Yeah.
I began in the late 1980s in the world of pre-digital microfiche, finding and downloading and printing out every single article, continued it over the years. And I would say 97% of their coverage has been nothing to see here, folks, move along.
Right.
What made these two articles different than the great vast majority of Times coverage was they were not dismissive. They were actually real, objective pieces of journalism. And the first article, even though it was in a tiny box at the bottom left of page 1, began on the front page of the Sunday Times. That's major. Carried into a full-page piece on essentially a program to study this that was authorized by Congress some years ago to the tune of $20-odd million. And that it was backed by major senatorial talent, and they did not think it was funny or silly. The article it led into covered the accounts of two retired fighter pilots. It's a scenario you and I are very familiar with that's been repeated all over the world since the 40s of jets being scrambled, climbing to a substantial altitude, observing something that was not a conventional aircraft, in some cases being ordered to fire their missiles at it, and in every case that we are aware of. It's just the way it is. It's their technology. How they do it is anyone's guess. Their panels basically went out, spooked the pilots, often turning to go back to base. As soon as they turned, everything comes alive again. Missiles did not discharge. And as respectable and respectful toward these two pilots as any article has been, the upshot of that is that because it was the New York Times and because they were serious, I think there have been a lot of people over the last years waiting in the wings to get a signal from legitimate major media that they could take this seriously without ridicule. So it sparked a great deal of discussion, a great deal of television coverage, radio coverage, spin-off articles in other publications. And it's difficult to attack the Times on their coverage because it was so well documented, because it went against their traditional policy. Now, a lot of people have been speculating on a deeper meaning. Two of the three writers on the major article are people that I know and very legitimate, respected journalists. Ralph Blumenthal is a staff writer for the Times who has written about UFOs seriously, and Leslie Kane, who is a well-known person in UFO studies. Unlike me, a self-trained investigative writer, Leslie is a real journalist. We connected many years ago when she wrote a very good piece, her first UFO article, for the Boston Globe. And she stayed in the work for quite a number of years and produced a terrific book. I think it's called Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Talk About UFOs. If I'm off, it's by a word. And she was smart enough to get these individuals to write their own chapters and then make commentary on it. It's a great book and belongs in any UFO library, but there was another writer I wasn't familiar with. So everything about it was kosher. And it still continues to be a buzz. I don't know whether it's part of some grand plan, as many people feel, or simply the Times saying, this is a good piece, a pair of pieces, let's run with it, and, making the editorial decision to do it. I guess time will tell on that.
Yeah. So Leslie's book is called UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on Record.
Ah, great. Yeah, and again, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's a terrific book.
And according to Amazon, it's on its 64,518th edition. That seems a little off to me.
That would make it the best-selling book in history, far above the Bible, I think.
Yeah, so
Way to go, Leslie.
I'm thinking there's an error in that that piece up there. But all right,
Yeah.
so like, how do you think that okay? So let's go to the Tom DeLonge thing.
Yeah.
Do you think he's being used? He actually just announced, was it last night or something, that he's going back to focus on music, and I thought, so this bombed for you, huh? So didn't quite work out how you thought. Someone suggested that the Joe Rogan interview pretty much buried him, and the people supporting him were like, you were the wrong person to do this.
Yeah, we talked about that the other day when you were visiting the house. For those who are not aware, Tom DeLonge, former member of the well-known rock band Blink-182, came out several years ago as a major proponent against UFO secrecy, took the subject very seriously, brought a lot of his fans and rock people into a greater interest of the subject. And then, what was it, last year or so, put together a company which he said, would kind of begin to change things, and he would lead the way. I always wish people the best in this work. I'm an optimist, but I've got real problems with this whole structure of his company, which is aimed at making movies.
Yep.
And where you can buy a piece of the company, you can buy into it, invest in it, but all the money that's coming in right now is going to Tom.
Right.
And his small cadre of original people to pay off the money that they invested in it. I hope that what we see is that that money is all paid off and investors start to receive money and they do start to make movies. But worst case scenario, it feels a little like a pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
And as you said, the interview that he did on Joe's show, which I listened to after we spoke about it, it
was a train wreck.
It really was not something that you could point to with pride and say, I want you folks to listen to this. He was all over the place. There was just a feeling of superficiality and running as fast as he could. Again, we all have off nights on the air sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
And again, I've never met the guy. I wish him well. I've never heard anything terrible about him.
No, not at all.
I think he's very idealistic. My best sense is that he is sincere about this, but maybe it's not the most effective way to pursue the goal that we're after of making this subject fully open.
What do you think the chances are that this is another Benowitz type of thing? Not on the same level, but they're playing games.
Yeah, well, you're talking about Paul Benowitz, who is a legendary personality in UFO studies, who basically was driven a little bit crazy and worked by FBI sources. I hope it's not that. As you said, Benowitz, I flashed on Greg Bishop's terrific book on this episode in ufology. I don't know. I certainly hope that is not how we look back and see it.
Yeah. What raises my suspicion is you got all, at the one hand, you have all these ex-government people, ex-CIA people, and it's kind of like, so, all right, so they would be the people who knew, but they're also the people that we shouldn't trust.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, which is it? I mean, when you talk to someone like Walter Bosley, Walter Bosley is FBI, CIA, I can't remember which, but he's ex-intelligence. And occasionally people will be like, well, why should we trust you? And he's like, because they're not paying me. I can barely pay my bills,
One wonders, for me, it flashed me right back to the 1960s when the then leading UFO organization, NICAP, maybe it was even in the 50s, I think, that with great excitement they brought onto their board a man named Roscoe Hillenkotter, who was the recently retired director of the CIA. A lot of people, I think optimists and somewhat naive, felt this is a real break. He's going to bring stuff to the table.
Right.
NICAP folded at a point after that, and one can only wonder whether he was encouraged to get in there and help them not produce the result that they were after. I don't know. It's cutting both ways. One would like to think, as in the case of Dr. Alan Hynek, who was the dean of UFO studies for many years, and in fact had the distinction of playing himself in a small scene toward the end of Close Encounters.
Oh, that's right.
He's the archetypical looking caricature of a scientist, beard, pipe, glasses, silvery hair, furrowed brow. And for years, up until the late 60s, really, he had been a consultant for the CIA who helped pioneer in 1953, documented well in the Robertson panel report of that year, a program to codify all of the disinformation of the previous 7 years and create a program that's been brilliantly effective, what they called a two-part program of education and debunking. Almost interchangeable in the way that they used it, where everything could be explained away. And Mr. and Mrs. Average would get a nice pat on the head if they thought they saw something in the sky. They even were quite visionary in visualizing a television program of the future where every week we'd be confronted by a new alleged UFO mystery, and a couple of Air Force guys would come in, investigate, and then tell us, nothing to see here, folks, move along. And in fact, I think it was in the 60s that a show like that did come up. Also, in one of the more, culturally worth noting moments, they discussed people in the media that they might approach who were friendly toward the government. One was a little organization at the time called the Walt Disney Cartoon Studio. Maybe they can help us educate people about this phenomena. Thank you for all the help, folks.
Well, it's also interesting that when, was it last year or the year before, they announced that some UFO sightings in the 1950s, particularly ones seen by airline pilots high up, were a test craft of, this, and they could mark out different ones. Well, yes, this was this plane we were testing, and we just, left it as a UFO sighting because they didn't want it known. And the response was, UFOs are now explained. It's like, no, UFO, a small section of these groups they're now admitting were a project they didn't want us to know about, so they left them as unexplained.
Those disc-shaped special experimental planes we were testing at that time, this is the ham-handed way that our government has tried to deal with this over the years. In 1997, 50th anniversary of Roswell, the government printing office came out with a book bigger than the old New York City phone book, Roswell Case Closed, 500 pages or something of complete BS, with stuff that was laughable to anybody that was knowledgeable on the subject, including the aliens. The alleged aliens were really crash dummies that they were using in 1953. But obviously there was a time continuum problem because it happened in 1947.
Right.
As an old friend of mine in Oklahoma once said, my mama told me I was born at night, but not last night.
Well, the thing with a lot of debunkers versus skeptics, I mean, a true skeptic is going to ask questions.
We have to be skeptics.
Yes.
You and I and people in the work have to keep up a very high level of skepticism.
The difference with that and a debunker is that the debunker already has decided there's nothing to this.
That's right.
And they will slap on any explanation. It doesn't have to be proven to them.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you just imagined that. Well, that doesn't explain away the data,
As a lot of your listeners know, I had the privilege for many years of working as the assistant to arguably the founder of the Seriah scientific study of the abduction phenomena, certainly the most complex, disturbing, and perhaps most important aspect of the center of what UFO studies should be directed toward. And we used to joke about this a little bit. My mantra was, they can't be, therefore it's something else, and I'll explain it to you. Bud, who had a wickedly dry sense of humor, would occasionally go into a fake reverie and say, aren't they amazing? We're doing our best to feel our way in the dark, to try to figure out what's going on, but they know that they don't exist, which makes them the true believers.
Yeah.
They know because it can't be. And never confuse a skeptic with a debunker. Again, being a skeptic is important, especially if you're professional in the work. But if you're a serious student of it, vet. The internet, of course, has become a main source of information and alleged information.
Yeah,
And
both
there is
good
some
and bad.
great stuff out there, but at the same time, there's a great deal of complete and total utter crap. If you don't check it out for yourself, if you see a really cool UFO photo, but there is no confirmable photographer, location, any witnesses, any stats, photo analysis, you know, it's like the old X-Files poster, I want to believe, which has gotten a lot of us in trouble over the years. There is this longing for many of us to prove, to calibrate, to establish that some UFO phenomena, certainly not all, and probably a very small percentage overall, are highly advanced pieces of machinery coming and going from parts unknown under intelligent control. For me, I think Stanton Friedman said it best. Stan, now retired nuclear physicist who has slugged away at this for over half a century and only recently, the past couple of months, basically announced his retirement in his 80s. Still one of the best speakers and best presences in the field, most grounded. If I'm off on this quote, it's by a word, which is, the question is not, are UFOs machines from parts unknown under intelligent control, etc.? The question is, has one ever been? And the answer to that is an overwhelming yes.
Yeah, you have to be willfully blind to deny there's something going on.
Yeah.
And that's true of most paranormal phenomena.
It is.
You know, I mean, if you look at ghosts, you look at Bigfoot, there's verifiable stuff there that there's something odd occasionally happens.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean every case is odd. It doesn't mean there aren't some prosaic explanations for some of it, but there are always those outliers where you're going, there's no good explanation for this.
That's right.
And you can tag in, well, they're aliens from Zeta Reticuli. And maybe they are, but we can't prove that.
Yeah.
And until we can prove that, it doesn't become a fact.
Well, as we know, and we were haranguing and having a little fun with frustration the other day, there are people in the field, well-known people who are respected by a lot of people, who publish books, who are on all the shows, who say things that are complete nonsense. And it's sort of like the emperor's new clothes. One of the best known of the individuals has stated that there are 58 different alien races visiting the planet Earth. All aliens are good. Everybody who has reported a negative experience in contact or abduction, that's really our military doing their best to give the aliens who are good a bad name. It's infuriating. And for me, it's easily provable by simply logically examining the claim. Even if you were the most connected ufologist in the history of the world, and also at the same time happened to be the head of the National Security Agency, the CIA, the President of the United States, President of Russia, Premier, and the head of 8 alien races. How could you know the exact number?
Yeah.
And how could one know that all visitors to Earth are full of goodness and light and
Right.
only mean us well? It would be funny if it wasn't so insulting and, by extension, infuriating.
There are no creatures on this earth that are all good or all bad. So, I mean, it's so simplistic.
But it's in space where everything is good.
Well, we can't prove he's wrong.
Exactly. And again, I think this longing, which only increases over time, it was first talked about by Carl Jung in a book that he wrote called Flying Saucers, a myth of modern myth of things seen in the sky.
Fantastic book.
Fascinating. And Jung, being Jung, comes down at different points in the book on both sides. It is collective unconscious projection, a longing for a pantheon of new gods to help us out of the situation we human beings have gotten ourselves into. Oh, yeah, and they may be machines from other planets, too.
Well, the thing is, you can almost make an argument that this is all somehow psychological, not necessarily coming from us, but something non-physical. But then you have those little pieces of physical evidence that you can't just throw out. Yeah. You have to accommodate those. The rings where someone sees someone come down on the ground, the implants, the variety of different things that we can't fully explain yet.
Yeah. You know,
and even the New York Times articles mentioned that they have alloys that they can't fully explain that have been captured. You know, they just kind of glossed over it in the New York Times article, but as everyone pointed out, that's probably the most interesting thing there, that they're admitting they have something they can't quite, This is where it gets to the forensic level. And for me, this has been my milieu for decades. I've not always been right, but my mentors, which included Bud, and a tough, no-nonsense Italian-American, Brooklyn, New York City police detective who also happened to be a crack UFO investigator, Pete Mazzola, who died much too young, encouraged me to investigate the way that law enforcement builds a case or an attorney would build a case. You want to triangulate on evidence. Photographic evidence that is supported by physical evidence, that's supported by firsthand witness accounts, that's supported by history in the area, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, it's all speculation, and it might as well be a religion, because you believe based on your faith in the person who's putting forward the theory that you want to believe, or in your heart of hearts that you want to believe. But it's like a snake biting its tail. It's simply this self-connected belief system supported by nothing but, hey, but there are millions of people that feel like I do. Mm-hmm. Okay, case closed. You're right. There was just an article, I didn't get to read the whole thing yet, Shirley Black sent to me, talking about how our brains are more likely to not... it's a scientific article talking about the way our brains will accept data that matches our belief systems very easily. It doesn't vet it the same way.
Sure.
And I mean, I'm aware of that because I'll read something and be like, yeah, and then I'll stop and I'll go back and I'm like, let me tear this apart the way I would tear apart something that I didn't agree with.
Especially, exactly. We have to keep checking ourselves.
Yeah.
Nobody else is going to do it for us. And boy, that makes a lot of sense. The other factor that is so effective, it's fascinated me to such a degree that I've spent years studying it as opposed to the UFO phenomena itself, which is the power of ridicule. And it covers the entire spectrum of human beings, from presidential candidates to billionaires, to mystics, to students, to housewives, to professionals. Nobody likes to have people make fun of them.
Sure.
And if there is one subject in the popular universe of information that has become a symbol, a shorthand for you may be mentally unhinged or a bit weak-minded or mystical, or you want to fool me, or Wilhelm Reich had a wonderful phrase called evasion of the obvious. We talked about the other day also, there are people out there who are involved in the field, but it's become fairly popular to dismiss the extraterrestrial hypothesis, following on some of the wonderful work that was pioneered by Dr. Jacques Vallée, writer-investigators like the great late John Keel, who maintained that UFO phenomena may be other things as well. I couldn't agree more. But that's not a rationale or excuse to dismiss what ultimately is one of the most conservative propositions, that we're not alone in the universe, that there are advanced intelligences that have created this technology. And that disturbs a lot of people. For some of them on theological basis, for others, I'm a sophisticated person. I went to college. I'm well-read. I know important people. Surely if this was real, I would know it by now. And I don't have time or the inclination to read a book on UFOs, please. I have other things to do with my time. So, they've built this perfect little system for themselves of, once again, a variation on it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else.
Well, do you know the story with Jacques Vallée and Carl Sagan?
Which story?
Well, Vallée talking to Carl Sagan, who used to be here in Ithaca, lived most of his life here, I think, right?
Died in 97.
Yeah. He approached Sagan talking about UFOs, and he said, if I can put together 10 really good cases, would you take an honest look at them? And Sagan said yes. So Vallée sat down, and he talks about this in, I think, Volume 1 of Forbidden Science's journals. He put together all these cases, all the information Sagan could possibly want, and then he contacted him and said, okay, I have this for you. And Sagan said, I don't have the time to do that.
I'm sorry to say I've got a story to match it. This goes back at least 25 years, maybe 30, when I was working with Bud. He and Carl did a television show together. Bud was nothing if not highly articulate, very intelligent, made his arguments extremely well. And after the show was over, they began to chat informally about this subject. And it was shot in New York, and Bud invited Carl back to his home, basically with the understanding he would open his files to him.
Right.
Carl was too busy, didn't have the time for it. And what Bud proposed, if I can find a case that I feel is guilt-edged in your area, the greater Tompkins County area, would you be willing to look at that? Sagan agreed. And about a year later, a young man showed up in his early 20s with his girlfriend, very troubled about what he felt was a lifetime of abduction experiences. Like a lot of people that have been through these experiences and sort of been beaten down by society if they open their mouths about it, highly intelligent but an underachiever. This guy who had gone to Cornell was working installing security equipment for folks with upscale lives and nice homes. And he actually did an installation of a very expensive security system at Carl's house, which he told us it was like, for a head of state or something.
Yeah.
And again, Carl was a
big name.
Yes, he was. And in his time, the scientist most associated with this kind of thinking. And in fact, this young man's father, I'm not going to use any names here, was a professor at Cornell who was a colleague of Carl's. And Carl once again said, I'm too busy.
Yeah.
Not that it was his fault, but this young man really had a tragic end, got lost in drugs. I don't know if having an opportunity to speak with somebody at Carl's level of the game and being taken seriously might have helped him. It may have just been the way it was supposed to be, sadly. But Carl, in his early work, before he was the great famous Carl Sagan, I thought was very courageous in his postulating about extraterrestriality, the reality of it, the technology behind it. But then, like Freud becoming Freud, don't want to talk too much about sex. This is Vienna in the 1920s.
Yeah.
Even though I feel most neuroses is rooted in, I've got an image now to protect. Very sad. And here, Carl is one step away from being a saint in this part of the country.
Yeah. And he's earned it. He has.
Absolutely. His show...
Cosmos, yeah.
Yeah. For a lot of your listeners, it was before they were watching TV or when they were really young. It was a PBS show, and it was outstanding. And I'm sure you can find it online.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure it's on YouTube.
Yeah, no doubt. Everything is.
And it was redone, too, by... what's his name?
Neil deGrasse.
Neil deGrasse Tyson, yeah.
Who also has a real attitude about UFOs.
Yes. Even when the New York Times article came out, he did. But I think that's towing the party line. I think that might be true of both of them. You get to such a level, you don't want to upset the wrong people.
No, you don't.
And I think, maybe Carl was too busy to look at Valet stuff. But Valet put all this work into something he said he would do, and then he just kind of brushed him off, which also might mean I don't want to look at this and find out you're right.
That's right.
Because that's, if he's intellectually honest, which I think Carl Sagan was, that might be a hard time for him because he can't just come out and say, look, there's something to this UFO phenomena, because that would ruin his career.
He had spent his professional lifetime becoming at one point the best-known popular scientific voice in America.
Yeah.
In great part because of the television show, his many public appearances. And he had a lot to protect. Once again, the power of the ridicule factor can never be underestimated in people backing down who have world-class credentials.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Let's hit a couple of these. I have a couple of questions from patrons.
Yeah.
And if anyone listening live wants to ask anything, you can do so by going to wheredidtheroadgo.com, and there's a little pop-up box, and it'll pop up here on my phone, so I can pass it along to Peter. So Mark Brady had a few things. We've sort of covered these, but I want to run through them anyway.
Sure.
He said the first subject would be to talk about your dad's book. So why don't you tell people a little bit about what the book is about? Ordinary Man?
Oh, that's very kind of you to ask. My dad, who was 98 last week, and still
going,
like Timex watches, takes a licking and keeps on ticking. Very much together and a great guy. He was born in Harlem in 1920. Always easy to do the math with Dad. Was a member of that greatest generation. Grew up poor, agnostic Jewish in New York City. At a time that's almost inconceivable to most of us now. And the early part of the book is things from his childhood that, will either make your jaw drop or shake your head. Coming of age in the 1930s. And then there's Pearl Harbor. And like so many men of his generation, joining the military shortly after, his time in the Army Air Corps. How his politics kind of came to a maturity with the world around him, meeting my mom, getting married, starting a family, and then focusing into a great part on his professional life as a small wholesale jeweler in the heart of the Diamond District in Midtown Manhattan. And talking about a lot of his friends, observations on the world, and ultimately to moving up here to Tompkins County about 25 years ago with my mom, and the life that he's lived. My dad is a no-nonsense kind of guy, and me and my sister Ann had to laugh. He didn't show us the manuscript while he was working on it. And finally, last autumn, we get a chance to read it. And it's not a huge book. I think it's a little over 110 pages. And we said, we and Helen, our late sister, we make it to about 3 pages. He said, well, I love you very much, but you are not my focus. And on the very last page of the book, there's a sentence each about each of us. But obviously, for our caller and anybody else that's interested, I'm not a very objective person to speak to about this, but he's a good writer. And his style is, this is the way I remember it. If I don't, I go on. And I will tell one story, which is after the book was published, he said, I'm now remembering other things I wish were in the book. And this will give you an example. He said it was 1927 or 28. He and his folks and his sister were in a car driving through Brooklyn, followed by his uncle and aunt and his two cousins, boy and a girl. At the time, in Brooklyn and all over the place, there were airstrips. It was not that long after World War I, and, these biplanes that they had made a lot of, especially the Curtis Jenny trainer, thousands of them were bought by folks, and they became the basis for stunt flyers and crop dusters and things. And they see a sign which says $5 for 5 minutes. And go up in an airplane. He asks his folks to pull over. His uncle and aunt pull up behind him. And they wait, and they see the plane coming in the distance. It is a two-wing Curtis Jenny. As it's coming in for a landing, the engine bursts into flame.
Oh.
And it lands. The pilot, rather laconically, steps out onto the wing. He's got a hand pump fire extinguisher. He helps his passenger out, who takes off fairly quickly, puts out the fire, and walks up to my grandparents and my great-uncle and aunt and, their progeny. A smile, interested in flying. Dad didn't remember which adult raised the question of the engine bursting into flames. But he reassured him it was no big deal, and quote-unquote, it happened all the time. Well,
all right.
My grandparents were not exactly helicopter parents. He's an authority figure. He was still alive and everything. And my dad and his cousin Reynold really wanted to go up in this plane. Oh, what the hell? They got the $5. It was before the Depression. The two boys go into the cockpit behind the pilot, and they take off. Well, the pilot must have sensed that this was a very big deal for these two boys. They didn't go for 5 minutes. They left Brooklyn. They flew over Manhattan. They flew over the Statue of Liberty. There were no FAA rules or anything about it.
Right.
Meanwhile, my father's saying, each one of us, we got our backs to each other. We're looking out. There's no safety belts. There's no restraints. We are having the greatest time of our life. They return about 40 minutes later, thank the pilot very much, and off they go. My dad's also a very modest man, and I think it's reflected in the title, An Ordinary Life, which it is not. It also reminded me that what's exotic to one person is every day for somebody else.
Sure.
And for me, to digress for one more minute, when I was 24, I took a deep breath, dared myself to do something out of school, had gotten myself out of military service during the height of Vietnam, a war that I would have left the country not to serve in if I had been pushed to it, joined the Norwegian Merchant Marine and shipped out on a freighter to see the world. And didn't stay in the Merchant Marine, just started drifting east at a time when a young person with a pack on their back could walk through Afghanistan and Iran and Pakistan and end up in India. And I ended up in Nepal on a mountain reading The Godfather, which was a fairly new novel at the time. And my companions from California, North Carolina, and Texas, who had all read the book, they were in awe that I knew the streets of Little Italy, that the Jones Beach Causeway where they shot Sonny, I'd go through there, once a week every summer when we go out to Jones Beach. For them, this was the height of exoticness. And I thought, remember this, grasshopper.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Adam Sane sat down with you and recounted that whole trip and everything else with you for Conspiranormal.
Well, we did a good part of the trip.
Okay.
I was gone. I told my folks I'd be gone maybe for a couple of months. I was gone for a year, and there were big periods where they didn't know where the hell I was. Stuff gets lost in the mail. You forget to write. I now have transcribed all the letters I wrote back home.
Oh, wow.
And there is one letter, and it will be the subject for a book in the future. It was the greatest thing I ever did for myself to learn how to take care of myself in really every situation imaginable over the course of a year, knowing nobody and living in these extraordinary places. But there is one letter in the entire pack that's typed, and I didn't write it. It's on, and now it seems so wistful and impossible, it's on the letterhead of the American Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan, from an undersecretary, and it begins to the effect of, "Dear Mrs. Robbins, we don't know where your son Peter is."
I'm sure that's what you wanted to hear.
And I'm reflecting, my God, the things we put our parents through, me especially. But I would encourage everybody to do it if you have a time machine and could travel safely.
Yeah. Well, John Keel did something very similar.
He did
for Jado. That's that book, is him traveling through not the world like you did, but down through from Egypt over across into India into the Himalayas, searching for, as he put it, real magic.
For me, I had no agenda. I hadn't any intention of going 10,000 miles out of my way. But at the time, India loomed as the most mystical, exciting, different, exotic location in the world for us, middle-class white kids in America here. And if we dared ourselves, for me, it all turned on a dime about 4 months on the road in a cafe in Istanbul one night, sitting with another bunch of travelers talking about if we had the money and the time. We all had the time, most of us anyway. The money was another thing. What would we do? Well, go to India, of course, but it's 5,000 miles away. And we went on into the evening and ended up, I met with a couple of the guys the next day, and we decided, you know what, if we each kick in a couple of $100, we could buy like a van and fix it up, and it's only 5,000 miles. Let's do it. We bought a broken down old Volkswagen camper and headed east, and I left them in Afghanistan and then made my way to India on my own. And it was the grandest adventure of my life, but it made me fall in love with travel, with taking rational risks, although all the risks I was taking then were far from rational. But hey, I was in my 20s and we were just out of the 60s, so, what are you going to do?
Are you going to put this in a book someplace?
Oh, totally.
Okay, good.
Absolutely, and I'll be back for that one. That's 2 books away, I think, but yeah, that's going to happen. But it did make me begin to appreciate something that I wish more Americans did, especially in this age of America First, which is we're all connected. Yep. And I don't mean to get wishy-washy or new agey or, kumbaya, but we are involved with everybody else in the world, even people that are very different than us. Mm-hmm. And you visit a foreign place once, and it stays with you. If something happens there that's good or bad, you pay attention. And I can't encourage people enough to travel when they're able, even given the state of the world right now. I have a dear friend who, he and his family every year go to Disneyland. That's great. But I remember once saying, Henry, have you ever thought of going to another country? Like England. It's a great place to start. They actually speak English. Well, a variation on it, although...
The real English.
Yes, exactly. And it would be exotic and great for the kids. Not really interested. Disneyland's got everything we want and need. Well, more power to them.
Sure.
At the same time, for me, life is an adventure, and when possible, should be lived as an adventure.
Absolutely. And not everyone, a lot of people like to play it safe. And
understood
that's fine,
and respected.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep, I agree.
There was something else.
It's not for everyone.
Your dad remembering something from when he was 7 just is awe-inspiring to me, considering he's 98. Because I can barely remember stuff from my teens, and I'm nowhere near his age. Yeah. And so it's the fact that he could remember that even happening. I have little snippets of stuff from when I was a kid, and that's the best I got. Yeah. I don't think I could tell a full story from when I was a kid.
I found in interviewing people over the years, especially older people, very often their long-term recall is extraordinary.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, hopefully you get a sense of that they are literally recalling as they're speaking. At the same time, might not remember what you had for lunch yesterday, but that's fine.
Fair enough.
And yes, his recall is extraordinary, but these are stories to a degree that me and my sisters grew up with.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful seeing him put it in a book. And for him, a week ago today, he did what may well be his only public event at one of our wonderful local bookstores, the Buffalo Street Bookstore. Had a great audience. He told some stories. My sister and I did readings from the book, sold a few copies. And his main point is, as far as I'm concerned, I've lived a pretty ordinary life, but I had a story to tell. And you do too. And you think you can't write a book? If I could, you could. And it's true. I think it's a wonderful lesson for anybody. And again, it's not a time-sensitive thing, unless obviously, you're truly having problems with memory.
Right.
So we're still getting wonderful bits of feedback on it. But thank you for that question. I appreciate that.
And he had two other things. And again, the second one we kind of already addressed. He said the second one would be to ask about if you thought the New York Times piece makes ufology more respectable.
I think it does for readers of the piece. Why? Because it was in the New York Times.
Right.
And yes, that means a lot for some folks.
My question is, if this piece had been released at a different point, say 2 years ago, would it have had more of an impact? Because it seems like it came out and people just went, yeah, whatever. Because there's so much other stuff going on in the world, and people are so freaked out about the politics and everything else going on that when the government says, hey, look, UFOs might be something, people went, okay, we don't care about that right now, I
hadn't thought about that, but you may be right, because our dear president sucks the air out of the room every time he opens his mouth. And, he's a one-man entertainment, horror movie, reality TV show, thinking out loud on, diplomacy by Twitter.
But the thing is, whether people like him or not, they're all now so engrossed in this argument.
It's the most interesting show in town, so to say. I think it might have made a difference. It might well have.
And the third question he had, and I'm not sure what exactly he's referring to, he says, have you found any more new documents beyond what Luis Elizondo has highlighted?
Well, I'm not sure what Elizondo has highlighted.
Yeah, that's what I wasn't sure of either.
There are literally several thousand formally classified documents that have been released either through Freedom of Information Act actions, a wonderful law that's now been unfortunately tightened to a degree, making it more difficult, especially for folks in our field, to get to information. And then before we had the Freedom of Information Act, which started under President Carter, there was a quiet, natural process of declassifying. At a point, I think every 3 years for 12 years, documents, they aimed to review them. And even if it was sensational, if it didn't bear on national security, it would quietly be declassified and put in a file for maybe somebody to discover in the National Archives. I focused with our reporter from the Ithaca Times on three important documents, one being the Project Sign, which was a secret Air Force report on the UFO phenomena, and the very first one in depth that we're aware of, runs 40 pages or so, was released in February of 1948. I'm sure you can find it online. A lot of it is fairly dry, but some of it is absolutely jaw-dropping and sounds like outtakes from the script of The Day the Earth Stood Still. And I'm not exaggerating. Toward the end, one of the individuals who is identified is reflecting and says in so many words, we on Earth are now doing something for the first time that can be observed in space. We are setting off nuclear explosions. We are experimenting with rockets. In 100 years, we may well be out in space with advanced modes of transportation, incredibly deadly weapons, and our same unstable human psychology. In light of history, they should be concerned. And above all else, we should expect to have such visitations now. It's an extraordinary document.
Huh.
The other was issued in a brief report on the flying disc phenomena, issued in September of 47, bearing in mind that the phenomena exploded on the world scene that summer. It's called the Twining document, as a rule, or report on concerning flying discs. Nathan M. Twining, general in the United States Air Force at the time. Well, wait, the Air Force became a reality in September of 47. Maybe it was Army Air Corps document. But at a certain point, he makes a statement that has gone on to become one of the best-known quotes in ufology, which is, the phenomena reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious. What happened to Twining? Was he quietly ushered out of the service or institutionalized or something? No. He went on to become head of the Air Force. And the other document was something called the Robertson Panel Report that we touched on earlier, which was in early 1953, under the auspices of the CIA. A group of individuals met for 3 days and set up basically what became the Bible for explaining away UFOs. Again, these documents are all available online. They are all fully authentic. There's nothing dodgy or fake about them, and they represent only the tip of the iceberg. As a student of history, I think it's very important that Americans know about these documents, and if they're inclined to study them, they speak for themselves better than anybody can.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is Where Did the Road Go? My guest here live, if you're listening on WVBR, is Peter Robbins. And if you have any questions for Peter, comments, you can go to the website at wheredidtheroadgo.com, and it will pop a little pop-up box, and you can send it that way. We got about a half an hour left tonight, and I'm gonna hit you with Alfred's questions. Alfred comes up with some of the hardest questions, and I appreciate the hell out of that.
Me too.
So his questions for you are, what are the weirdest cases you have investigated or know about? The ones that made you question what you thought you knew about UFOs.
Way to go, Alfred. I'll give you one immediately. Some years back, I was invited to speak for a regional UFO group here in the Northeast. I had been made aware that one of the individuals that I was going to meet was somebody with a history of this abduction phenomena who lived in a very rural area. Extremely nice guy, very pragmatic, as I recall, an electrician married to a nurse. I visited them at their home. He came to the talk that I gave, and his story was so extraordinary that he had been visited by leading people in the field, including Bud Hopkins, Dr. David Jacobs, John Mack, because it was so extraordinary and he was so credible. The first thing I noticed when I walked into their house was it was as standard American issue as you could find, and I mean that respectfully. No airs, everything very functional. Sears and Roebuck kind of reality. But I realized sitting in his living room that I was seeing something I don't think I had ever seen. If I did a 360-degree gentle turn, there were at least a dozen clocks in sight. And they were not clock collectors, but there was this focus on time. He had had a fair amount of missing time. And Alfred, to go to the heart of your question, the incident that he became well known for within this select group of students and researchers of the subject was one night, a classic bedroom abduction began. His wife is absolutely out like a light, classic, and he starts levitating off the bed. Like the Linda case, the Brooklyn Bridge case, like so many cases, you are floated through a wall or a window or a roof. It happens. And he was somehow, he had been sleeping on his stomach. So he was rising, with his back to the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
And he started to pass through the ceiling. And then something technologically went wrong. While I'm just doing my best to explain this, while his molecules were starting to occupy the same space as the ceiling, who knows why it happened or what happened. It was obviously not what they planned, but the technology went kaput, and gravity took over and he fell. But part of his back was in the ceiling.
Whoa.
And it tore open a very nasty gash. When he hit the bed, his wife woke up. He's bleeding rather profusely from his back. She's a nurse, does practical first aid, and rushes him to the nearest hospital emergency room. What happened to you? I don't even remember what he told me relative to it. I had seen very analytical photos of the scarring on his back. Mm-hmm. He's an extremely kind soul, and he understood that people like me were not visiting him, because it's a freak show, but because he was an important individual involved in this, whatever it is. And I remember him asking me with a smile, a sincere smile, would you like to look at the scar? And I thought to myself, this guy, there's a dignity that he's carrying around. A really blue-collar reality, a kind soul. I didn't need to see it. Mm-hmm. And I thanked him, but I said it's not necessary. That would be one for certain, Alfred. Another one is my friend Ket Thorvaldsen, who we were talking about earlier, mm-hmm. an absolutely stunning Norwegian woman who has had contact experiences throughout her childhood. And at a certain point some years ago, started to study this implant phenomena, that these things, which are either metallic-based or silicone-based, are put in the body, going back well before we human beings seemingly had this technology. Some of them are no bigger than a grain of rice. Other ones are larger. And she decided to see if she had any. And she went for a CAT scan in Norway and found out that she had something like 24 of them going up both sides of her spine and in her sinus areas. Again, there's no surgical whatevers.
We have the video for putting the magnets
That's
on.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that Ket is very down to earth and a very pragmatic thinker. I think that the normal reaction most of us would have would be, get that damn thing out of my body and do it yesterday. Her feeling was, they're there, probably for a reason. Mm-hmm. I'm okay. They're
also patterned.
Yes.
And that's interesting.
If you're going to start to move them out, could it throw... Anyway,
yeah.
She lives with them, and they don't do anything that upsets her or is a problem for her health or anything, and she's very outspoken about it. For me, that's pretty mind-blowing. I've studied this phenomena for years. I've handled dozens of these implants, ones that were removed by the great late Dr. Roger Lear, mm-hmm. who was a podiatric surgeon who put his career at risk by surgically removing these from quite a number of people my old friend Daryl Sims, who right now is dealing with a major health crisis, and we all wish him speedy recovery. His focus as a researcher has been these implants as well. I know how it sounds, but it's simply part of the way it is.
And the thing about, like, I understand her decision not to have them removed. I could see if you have one and you say, well, get it out of me. But when they're aligned along your spine, it's kind of like, all right, this seems quite intentional. Yeah. Like there's a reason they're where they are.
And you can see them in the scan. I mean, they're round. And like you said, and when she does that demonstration, she does take the time to completely wash her face so that people can say, oh, it's sticking to, the oil.
And I've heard that a few times,
Yeah, of course.
And the second part of his question, the follow-up, was what assumptions, hypotheses, etc., have you had to reconsider, if any, due to some of these cases?
That's a great question. I really appreciate hard questions. I'm not a fan of softball questions. For me, Alfred, it's brought me to a point in my life where, having been obsessed with this for decades, and at this point I won't say it's obsession, it's what I do. People say, oh, you're an authority on this subject because you've studied it so much. Can you answer these questions? I realize I exist in an area very close to the Zen definition, a Zen beginner, which is knowing that you know nothing and having it be all right. I know more than nothing about this subject, but the more I learn, the more I am somewhat overwhelmed with the mysteries that it presents. Yeah. It's like opening a Pandora's box and seeing 100 other lids there, and each time you open one, it's another well of mystery. Yeah. I know that I don't know the answers. Deductive reasoning, critical thinking, careful study, research, examination of evidence, meeting people around the world that have had experiences, sightings, artifacts. I think I can safely say we are not alone. That there are other intelligences that come and go from our transom at will. Their intentions can only be guessed at. I think, it's just my opinion, that they, some of whom are likely extraterrestrial, other who are one dimension away, sitting in the seats around us right now enjoying our conversation, however you want to see it, that we live in a world filled with so many more questions than answers. The years that I started this, like a lot of activists, it was, power to the people. We want the answers now. Government has to release what they know. The world is ready. I'm much more circumspect now. We in this field, paranormal studies, especially if we're active and we have lots of friends and colleagues that are also in it, begin to develop almost an illusionary sense that we represent a fairly respectable segment of humanity. We really don't. We're a very small section.
Sure.
And for those people that, disclosure now and release everything that we have, are not fully thinking out the upset, the trauma, the unpredictability of a sudden shock to the human system, humankind system, of just dropping this like an undeniable bomb in the middle of everything. So, Alfred, for me, it's made me realize how little I really do know. But coming from that, and I remember that point of saying, you know what? When I started out in my 20s, there were people I looked up to, older people who are gone now, and they never got the answers to their questions. I'm beginning to feel the chances are excellent that I won't have those answers either. How do I feel about that? You know what? I feel fine about it. How boring the world would be without mysteries.
Exactly.
And in a way, the objective, because you may in life in any area of study not get the answers that you want, but if you're engaged, if you are working at trying to get the answers. To paraphrase, Martin Luther King, I might not get there, but the ride is the thing. We're all moving forward together as best we can, and it's the same in our field.
One of the first times I realized how well I clicked with Greg Bishop is when Bishop said something like, and I can't remember what my phrasing of it, but I think Greg's was, "We need to ask better questions."
Yeah.
And people get upset sometimes because they'll listen to this show and they'll be like, "Well, these guys don't have any answers." And I'm thinking, yeah, but we're trying to redefine the questions. We're trying to see what assumptions we should throw out and look at again. And where we haven't solved this because we're not looking at it the right way. We don't have all the pieces.
Yeah. By the way, for listeners who are not familiar with Greg Bishop, he is, I think, one of our most significant contributors in terms of being a critical thinker.
Yes.
Who is sharp as a tack, has a good sense of humor, God knows.
Humble.
One of the nicest people I know in the work, and one of the most scholarly. He's written so much and so well for so many years.
Yeah.
Go online to barnesandnoble.com or Amazon Books and type in author Greg Bishop. You should have some of his books in your library for sure.
And the latest one, It Defies Language, is a collection that's just fantastic.
I got it last summer. He's kind enough to give me a copy when I saw him last in Roswell last summer. As we don't get to things immediately, but I have read it now. It's courageous. It makes him very vulnerable in many respects.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I said, he's a very humble guy.
He is.
Genuinely humble.
Yeah. Whose hobby is hang gliding, which makes me crazy. Jesus Christ.
I don't think it's just hang gliding. I think he also does like the suits and all that kind of stuff.
He's amazing. He really is amazing. Truly one of my favorite writers in the field, favorite thinkers.
Yeah.
And for somebody like me who has been fairly laser focused on the UFO phenomenon and its implications rather than, other areas of the paranormal, he has given me cause to think through certain aspects of the way that I come at subjects. And you can't have a better colleague than that.
Yes, absolutely. Now, you said the book on your world travels is probably 2 books away. What are you working on?
Right now, I'm working on a book that will be kind of an anthology of writings that I've done over the years, things that have ultimately been published in magazines as book chapters, conference papers, editorials, monographs, essentially research papers on maybe 15 different aspects of coming at the UFO subject from different angles at different points in my development. It's not going to be groundbreaking in that I rarely protect the information that I put out with some kind of really heavy copyright or anything. Once it's out there in the world, people can read it. They can base their research on that, which I often encourage people to do. It'll be out later this year sometime. Don't have a title for it or a working title, but it will be a full book of essays on different aspects of my research. Many of them, I think some folks would consider fairly tame because they're often historical analysis and musings on things like the impact of the ridicule factor or certain case histories or individuals involved in the work. The book after that, that I've also been roughing out and that my dear friend, soul brother, and close colleague Richard Dolan is always cheerfully on my case to speed me toward, would be a UFO-related memoir. Richard, who, if you don't know who he is and you're listening to this show, shame on you. He is one of our greatest theorist minds and writers and certainly public speakers in the field.
Sure.
And a great guy as well, lives in Rochester. Hop, skip, and a jump down the road from us. He sometimes kids me and refers to me as the Zelig of ufology. If you've never seen Zelig, the film, it's worth watching. It's a fake documentary by Woody Allen, who some of you hate and some of you love, but a heck of a filmmaker about a guy in the early part of the 20th century who meets everybody famous in the entire world. And I have had a lot of brushes with well-known people in the field and out over the years. I think it would be enjoyable to write, for sure. And then the book that I've done the most research for and on, again, the one that I'm working on right now is more a matter of assembling and re-editing, would be a book on this event of taking off and leaving the United States with a pack on my back, and 5 months later standing a few miles from the Tibetan border, having made the whole trip overland and overseas, and then working my way back through some of the same countries, returning to Afghanistan, deciding kind of on a whim, because I'm primarily Russian-American, that I wanted to see the Soviet Union, which of course was really easy for a Jewish person at the height of the Cold War. I was told it was impossible, but I basically presented myself at the Soviet embassy in Kabul and spent an hour and a half or so convincing the undersecretary that got stuck with me that this was terribly important to me as a young artist and an American of Russian descent. And a week later or so, I was boarding a train in northern Iran and making my way through the Soviet Union by train.
Wow.
That book I've done a tremendous amount of research on already. And like anybody that loves to write, you know, as they say, it's a lot of people romanticize it. It's often not fun. 98% perspiration, 2% inspiration. I try to write every day, but I don't. And this one I'm really game to go on, but I am pushing it back till after these other projects are completed.
All right. That article I was mentioning earlier came out in the British Psychological Society Research Digest, in the title, which we will cover on a Fringe News show hopefully this week. Our brains rapidly and automatically process opinions we agree with as if they are facts.
I love it.
So, I mean,
Brilliant.
Doesn't
that make all the sense in the world?
It does. It totally does. Huh. You got one. We have just a couple minutes here. You have one event coming up here in Pine Bush.
I actually have two events.
Two. Right. Yeah, you do, don't you?
A Pine Bush UFO fair and conference. Pine Bush is a tiny little hamlet about 2 hours north of Manhattan, which for reasons we can only make our best educated guesses at, has the highest incident of confirmed UFO sightings, events, a lot of spooky stuff in certainly all of the Northeast, but very likely in America. And they have, like a lot of thousands of towns in America, backs to the wall financially. If they have more than earned the right to have this event. And like Roswell, the Exeter, New Hampshire UFO Festival and Conference, the McMinnville, Oregon UFO Conference, and now a spate of others around the country, they have an event that's a lot of fun for kids and people that just, want to have a good time, and a serious conference at the same time. This will take place on May 19th, which is a Saturday. It is a lot of fun, and we will have some great speakers there. If you can come, please do join us. If you are in New York State and you are not that far, or you want to make a little trip to little, very pretty Olean, Olean, I will be giving a free talk at the public library there the Saturday before. I think it's on the 12th. And you can consult with them. I think it's 2:30 to 4. Love to see you there, and I love libraries, do anything I can to support them.
All right. Well, this has been a great conversation, as it always is when you're here, Peter.
Our time flies. You are truly a very special show in my heart, As you know, in the old days, people always came to the studios to do shows, and now this is the only one. I actually get to be at a radio station again when I do your show.
And, I mean, as much as I love the fact that I can talk to someone on the other side of the world as if they're sitting next to me, I still would rather do it live in
when
the
they
studio.
are next to you.
Yes, exactly. So anytime I can do that, like I said, Adam back in October was the last time that happened, but I am determined to get Mike Clellan down here.
Yes.
Yeah, he's totally down with it. I just got to actually get him to pick a date and a time. We got to get Richard Dolan back.
Absolutely. Well, you tell Mike that if they can come down, I'll put him up.
Yes.
And get him back and forth to the studio. And yes, what was it, a couple of years ago now, when Richard was in town, we had so much fun with you. We not only were your guests on Where Did the Road Go, but that afternoon
you did a jazz show.
Yes.
Yep.
We're both big jazz fans, different kinds of jazz are focused. And we got to be DJs, and we had a ball. And Richard does want to do it again, but he's the busiest man in rock and roll, so It's a matter of tying him up and pinning him down.
All right. Well, I thank you again, Peter. Your website is
peterrobbinsny.com.
All right, and it's sort of updated. There's some stuff up there. There'll be more.
Yes.
And thanks to my patrons for the cool questions.
Yes.
And I'm going to give an extra special thanks to the patrons here in a moment. But next Saturday, the 28th, Eliza Rickman, who I often have played numerous times ending the show, is going to be playing here in Ithaca, opening up for, me and remembering names. Let me take a look here. Oh, Rasputina. And they're going to be playing, she'll be opening up for Rasputina at the Haunt. So if you like this and you're in Ithaca, go check out Eliza Rickman and, Rasputina next Saturday, the 28th. And, I guess that's it. I will see you next time. And, we're going to hear Maker of My Sorrow from Eliza Rickman. I'm not used to ending the show live anymore. So here we go. See you next time. And a special thanks to our Patreons who are pledging at the $10 or above level: John Eddy, Chris Elmquist, Christopher Vaughn, Patricia Giaquinta, Allison Cook, Robert Groom, Christopher Sheehan, Mark Brady, Roland Belstedt, Kevin Shrek, Super Inframan, Alfred Tuttle, Carla Mahoney, and Gabriel Zero. Thank you very much. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.